What's up, fam? Elijah Scheider here. Welcome back to another episode of EXTOL We. And this week, Ruby is my extra and I am the ordinary. The videos that went live this last week were Add to the Beauty, connected 3.5 years ago in the past to a video called Finite plus Infinite. It's so incredibly beautiful for me to be able to sit here and to celebrate together with you and Ruby that I have reached the end of 6 years of labor in things that God has called me to labor faithfully in a place of a seed being planted in the dark, in the foundations of his kingdom, praying into the things of his heart and asking Jesus for his own. It's so beautiful that years and years ago, that there was a night when my little one, she had just been born. My wife was away in Ohio visiting my family and getting to introduce Azriela to her grandparents for the first time. And I was in this time period where I was praying through the life of Ruby, and it was just, my heart was so grieved in the things of her passing. I was just wrestling so hard with the goodness of God, of like, how is this good, Father? Like, I'm so sorrowful. I'm so grieved at the loss of life. And I was trying to process those things with God. And that in that space, I got out my guitar and began to strum around. And that a beautiful expression of worship popped out of my life that has been one of the most beautiful expressions of worship that God has ever graced me to release into the earth. And I'll include her video that I made for her in 2020 when we didn't have a Ruby May Solberg Day, that I came to Ruby May's gravesite and recorded the song to send to April and Ryan, her parents, to encourage their heart. But the overflow of that expression says that even in a place where I'm in a dark time and that I can't see what God is doing and I can't hear his voice and that I test his will and I find that it's not pleasing, that I find that his will is bitter to my mouth and that I don't want to receive the things that God has called me to do, that in that place that I will praise his name by faith, and that in that space of sitting with him and allowing his word to shape my heart, to confront me, to correct me, and to guide me into his heart, that from that space that I find his will good, pleasing, and perfect. Friends, it's so beautiful for me to be able to sit here at the finish line of 6 years of labor, that 6 years ago today, on Monday, February 17th, 2026, that I released my very first video, Extraordinary Life with Elijah, that God has called me into a 7-year process. But today, Tuesday, February 17th, 2026, this is the finish line of 6 years of labor with God faithfully in the dark. The Exodus says, 6 days you shall do your work, and on the seventh rest. For in 6 days God created all things and then rested from his labor. Elsewhere in Exodus, it says 6 years you are to do your labor, and on the seventh you are to rest, so that you may refresh the slave born in your house and the alien. Friends, it's so incredibly beautiful to be sitting here at the beginning of my season 7 of Extraordinary Life with Elijah, but to cross a finish line of 6 years of labor in the dark with the Lord, and joining with Ruby May, that unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it cannot bear much fruit. That is so beautiful to see then how in this season of time, as I've considered her little life and all the things that God has done, and going back and listening to the worship that has been released in my life through considering her own, that God has come back to teach me again about how he reveals his heart to those who are childlike. Friends, if you haven't seen the video, Add to the Beauty, I encourage you to go and watch it. In that, she so refreshed my heart to restore to me a childlike joy in my process of laboring before the Lord. That as I was considering all those things again, that then the Lord gave me additional revelation out of Psalm 8:2 that says, out of the lips of infants and babes, you have ordained a stronghold of praise to silence the foe and the avenger. Out of those things with the Lord, I was so passionate about them that he gave me vision and leading worship at this worship night called Pursuit Night, to invite one of our infants in my faith family at C3 to come and lead worship with me, to be my worship leader and to set the direction. I could be her armor bearer. I asked my wife, Charla, to pray to see who God would lay on her heart to invite as being an infant to lead worship with me. Friends, on her own, with leading from the Lord, that my wife, Charlotte, the two friends that I celebrate in my video from 3.5 years ago in the past, finite plus the infinite, it was their child that God laid on her heart to come and lead worship with me. Friends, that is absolutely insane. We reached out to them to see if their daughter could come and lead worship with me, and they had a family issue and they couldn't make it out. But that, friends, the silliness of my father to take those kind of things. Charlotte did not know any of that. No one did. They don't even know, but that we were able to reach out and that God put all of that together. As I moved into my season 7 and celebrating the praise that comes forth from the lives of infants and babes, the childlike of the childlike that forms a stronghold of praise to silence the foe and the avenger. Friends, as I pressed into that passage with the Lord, that he pointed out how infants are completely reliant upon their caregivers. They don't resist anything that comes to them. They're completely helpless. They have to have their little bottoms changed to be rolled. They can't even lay on their faces and survive and breathe without their parents making sure that they're positioned well so that they can have life and to grow and to mature. But it's so beautiful to see how God creates babies that as soon as they come out of the womb, that they break into life with only an emotional intelligence in place. They have zero mental constructs at all. All they have is emotional intelligence. And that scripture says that you'll seek me and find me when you seek for me with all of your heart. And elsewhere in Acts, it says, from one man, God created every nation of man, and he ordained the times and places where they should live so that men would seek out to him, reach for him, and find him, though he's not far from each one of us, because in him we live and move and have our very being. And so seeing that God takes little babies, he destines who they are to be born to, in what time period and what place, people, place, and time, and that he positions them there with pure emotional intelligence so that they'll have the greatest blessing and opportunity to break forth into the earth and to seek God with all and only their heart. Oh man, out of that infants and babes, out of the mouths of infants and babes who are only moved by the impetus of heart motivation, crying out for their needs to be met and to be connected with and to find their parent, that out of their mouths that God has ordained a stronghold of praise. That, friends, this expression of a stronghold comes from a word meaning strength, might, material or physical, that he has provided a stronghold of praise. That elsewhere in Zechariah it says, return to your stronghold, you prisoners of hope, for I will return to you double. The word, the stronghold there, is to be cut off from, to be removed from your enemies, and to be given a place of rest from forces that would seek to kill your life. Return to your stronghold of childlike praise, you prisoners of hope. Like you have been made prisoners. I don't want to have hope. I want to get away from hope. Too bad. You're its prisoner. Return to your stronghold. Be cut off from your enemies by being returned to the foundation of strength and childlike praise. Friends, as you begin to look at that, then a stronghold, a foundation of strength, that Jesus is our foundation. He is both cornerstone and foundation of everything that the kingdom is built upon. It's Jesus. And that as we return to him, that his name is a strong tower, that the city of God, whose walls are salvation and his gates are praise, that as we come and we hide ourselves in the foundational strength of Jesus, established by these little monsters of praise, that as we do, that the beauty is that we will find that the foe and the avenger are cut off from us. We're given a place of safety and of rest and silence with our Father in his house. That you have ordained a stronghold of praise through infants and babes to silence the foe and the avenger. Friends, also, this word silence is so incredibly beautiful, friends, that it says that might silence the foe and the avenger, to cease, to desist, to cause to cease, to put an end to exterminate, to destroy, to cause to desist through involuntary muteness. It's like Jesus when he stood up and he spoke to the winds and waves and he said, "Peace, be still." Involuntarily muteness and stuck a muzzle on the enemy. That's the explosive expression of barbarian babies to face the foe and the avenger. And that then the beauty is then that word also, so crazy, is to express the keeping or observance of the Sabbath in all righteousness and holiness. And so, friends, that I get to sit at the finish line of 6 years of labor with Ruby May, an infant whose mouth is releasing a stronghold, a foundation laid in the earth of praise that is silencing, cutting off the foe and the avenger, and saying, Elijah, moving into your season 7, into the 7th year, that this is how you observe rest in the kingdom, Elijah. It's so beautiful for me to consider her life, that it says that God, before any one of the pages of her life came to be, that as God knit her together in her mother's womb, that he saw every page of Ruby's destiny marked out before one of them came to be. But that as darkness came in to steal, kill, and destroy, and say, I'm going to rip all of the pages out of the book of this story that God is writing of his glory in the earth, that it says that Jesus comes to give life and life more abundantly. Last week we looked at greater works still, that Jesus said, you will do all of the works that I have been doing and greater. Imitation is limitation, where Jesus has said that our destiny is to do greater works still. At the end of John, that it says that beyond all the things that were written down about Jesus's life, that there were more greater still. If all of the works were written down, that all of the libraries in all of the world would not be able to hold and contain all the things that Jesus had done. And so Jesus comes where darkness has come to say, I'm going to kill, steal, and destroy. Jesus is coming to give life, return all the pages to her destiny, and that he is going to rewrite so many more pages still in the glories and the stories that are going to come through the church, through this little life. As darkness came and said that he was going to steal her life from her mother's womb, that Ruby's mother's womb, where God was knitting her together, became her tomb, and that the very first face that little Ruby May saw was the face of Jesus. But that Ruby May is speaking a word to me in my life, where my heart, in context of saying, coming together in a wider context of worship with every tribe, tongue, kindred, nation, denomination, tradition, belief, taste, preference, and all points in between. When my heart says, oh boy, I don't know if I can do that. That probably is not going to happen. When that voice of doubt comes in my life, to doubt my Father's provision and plans being expressed in the earth, the fulfillment of Jesus's prayer, Father, make them one as you and I are one. And I'm like, probably not. That when I come as the foe to the will of God in the earth and the answer to the prayers of my big brother Jesus, little Ruby May says, Elijah, I'm going to silence that voice in you and show you the way. The way forward into the Father's house is through the womb of a tomb. Friends, the way forward into the plans of God have to be labored over in prayer in the garden. That Jesus demonstrated that he had to become willing to die before he could engage the will of his Father. The hill that God has for you to die on is not the one that you're going to say, ooh, I'll die on that hill. Sign me up. Yeah, let's go. I'll die on that hill. I would posit gently, you have not found your hill to die on yet. That Jesus said, Father, anything but that hill. In becoming willing and saying, Father, yes, I will drink this cup. That he then took up his cross, the instrument of shame and scorn and torment that he was to lay his life down upon. No one could take Jesus's life from him. It was his to lay down. But the Father, he's the one who said when and where to lay it down. And so for Jesus to be obedient to the Father's will, he had to pick up the structures that were so scornful and shameful to him and carry those structures to the place where he was to die, the hill he was to die on. There, erect that structure, allow other people to affix him to it, and there, lay his life down there. After he had laid his life down, though, on those structures that threatened shame and scorn and pain and torment, that then two of people that were not even his disciples, people who didn't get it, that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, who were of religious sects that fought against Jesus, were the men who came, took Jesus's body down and planted him in the tomb of resurrection, the place where his life was knit together in the transformation of the Holy Spirit to be called forth from the womb of a tomb, rebirthed, reborn into resurrected life as Jesus, our resurrected Lord. Friends, Miss Ruby May is preaching a message of truth to my life that absolutely wrecks me. Out of the mouth of an infant baby, the childlike of the childlike of the childlike, an infant who never even came forth from her mother's womb is speaking to me a word of correction that is silencing all opposition in my heart that would say, probably not. Me as being the foe, fighting against the will of God, that she is silencing me, saying, silence, Elijah. And that's me coming as an avenger, as a part of the team of avengers who have superhuman strength and have ideas and can solve problems that mere humans are not able to solve, but just call me. I'm Team Avengers. Then she comes to me likewise and says, zippity zip it, fool. That God uses the things that are weak to shame the strong, that he uses the things that are not to nullify, to make non-existent and of no importance those things that are, so that no one can boast before God. That my little friend Ruby May, that in her life of baby barbarism, ordained of God to, from her little mouth, to declare a solid foundation of invitation to community of communion together in a covenant communication of heaven coming to earth, that her little life planted in the ground has become a foundation that has found fellowship with me in the darkness as I've been planted over these last 6 years of laboring with Jesus in a place of darkness, in crawl spaces, in the foundation of his house, to pray with him in the darkness into the foundations, and to find an expression of the revelation of heaven that would silence the foe and avenger, that would keep his children outside of the Father's house of celebration in his presence. Friends, as Jesus told the parable of the workers who were invited to work in the vineyard for pay, and they said, yep, we'll go and do it. And they worked the hardest through the heat of the day, and they labored the longest and the hardest and suffered the most, that at the 11th hour and 59th minute that Jesus brought in workers to stand in the field. And as soon as they stepped into the field, that the final whistle went off, marking the end of the day. And that Jesus said, call the workers who are hired last and pay them first, and then bring in the workers that were hired first and pay them last. And as those who worked the longest, watch those who were worked the shortest get paid the same amount, that they said, we're going to get paid more because we've worked harder. And that when they received the same pay, they lost their minds with the master. And they said, this is ridiculous, that they would get the same wage as us who've worked the hardest and the longest. But the master said, friends, is my money not mine to do with what I want? That did you not agree to work for this pay? Like, take your pay and go. Or is your eye evil because I am generous? It's been so beautiful getting to hang out with my innocent little prophet, and to learn the lesson well, that over this 6 years that I've been laboring for a reward that the Father has had for me the entire time, of a community night of worship held on Sunday, February 14th, 2027 in Bozeman, Montana. That is for the entire Church of Bozeman. The invitation is going out to the entire church of the Gallatin County and to the four corners of the earth, that I'm doing good to the world, but especially to those who belong to the household of the family of believers in my home. And so the party is open to the world, but especially to my family who belongs to the household of believers in the city of Bozeman. That from the very first day when I recorded my first video in the crawl space on Friday, February 14th, 2020, that God revealed to me the finish line of the 7-year anniversary on Sunday, February 14th, 2027, having one hootenanny of a heavenly celebration as a family of God with all of his kids in his house. It's coming up. If you didn't hear that, Sunday, February 14th, 2027, here in Bozeman, Montana. Mark your calendars, more details to come. But that out of that has been my reward that God has set before me as my joy. And I've labored for it for 6 years, my friends. And that sitting here together with my little mouthpiece of championing the vision of my Father, that is such a blessing to encourage you to look at the life of Ruby May. The way forward is to enter into the tomb of heaven's womb, to see heaven rebirthed in our life, of joining with Christ in his death and resurrection. That her little life that was lived so well, that her destiny declares that if we will seek God with all of our heart, leaning not on our own understanding, that we will be directed into a straight way into the Father's house to seek him in his presence and to receive the fullness of joy, pleasures everlasting at his right hand, as we allow infant, childlike praise to come forth from our lips, to establish a stronghold of praise that we can return to as prisoners of hope, and to silence the mouth of the foe and the avenger. So if you subscribe to what I am doing, then hit the button, hit it, and then get it. Hit the bell as well so you get notified with the new content. I'm a content creator. Been finding all kinds of secrets out in the darkness, and now I'm gonna start shouting them from the rooftops. If you loved this video, you didn't just like it, then hit that thumbs down button. Hit the thumbs down button. I pray blessings on all of our lives together. I love you guys lots, and I will see you in the next video.